A cynical billionaire is challenged by his old college friend to make a woman living in poverty fall in love with him, using only his personality and not his wealth. He starts to genuinely fall for her, but she has secrets of her own, including a past that could ruin him. He needs to decide between her and his reputation. In the luminescent glow of Manhattan's skyline, Charles Barton stood apart. Perched atop the 50th floor of his high-rise, the city sprawled below him like a chessboard waiting for his next move. At 40, Charles had amassed a fortune that could influence the tide of industries, yet tonight his attention was drawn inward, to the gilded confines of his penthouse where a game of a different sort was unfolding. Around the sleek black poker table sat his closest acquaintances, each a titan in their respective fields, from tech moguls to real estate barons. The air was thick with cigar smoke and the clink of expensive scotch. It was Hugo, a longtime friend and occasional rival in business, who leaned forward, a sly grin playing across his face. "Come on, Charles," Hugo taunted, shuffling the cards with practiced ease. "Admit it, there's nothing your money can't buy, right?" Charles's smile was thin, his eyes scanning the room. "I've yet to find something that isn't for sale," he replied coolly, accepting the challenge in Hugo's tone. "Is that so?" Hugo dealt the cards, his question hanging in the air like the smoke around them. "How about love? Can you buy that?" The room fell silent, the question absurd yet intriguing. Charles picked up his cards, his expression unreadable. "Perhaps not directly," he conceded, "but it can certainly set the stage." Hugo laughed, the sound echoing slightly. "Here's a bet, then. Make someone fall in love with you, someone who doesn't know your wealth. If you can do that, I'll believe you." Charles raised an eyebrow, the idea piquing his interest. "And what are the stakes?" "If you lose, you'll donate $500,000 to the charity of my choice," Hugo proposed, his gaze locked on Charles. "And if I win?" Charles' voice was steady, his mind already turning over the possibilities. "I'll double that amount for your favorite charity." It was a game, another form of entertainment for men who had too much of everything. Yet as Charles sipped his drink, the seed was planted. Could he, stripped of his armor of wealth, genuinely captivate someone? "Deal," Charles said finally, shaking Hugo's hand. The challenge was set, and the night grew deeper with strategies and laughter. But as the guests departed and the city quieted down, Charles's thoughts lingered on the bet. Tomorrow, he would begin his most intriguing venture yet. The next morning, Charles stood before the panoramic window of his office, the city bustling beneath him as it awakened. He pondered over his conversation with Hugo. The bet was simple, yet complicated in ways that intrigued him. Who would be his target? It had to be someone who would challenge the very foundations of his belief, someone who would genuinely believe love wasn't a commodity. After a series of calls and subtle inquiries, his assistant brought him a name: Emily Gray, a local community organizer known for her fiery speeches against the socio-economic disparities fostered by the elite of Manhattan. She was perfect, a woman of conviction, living a world apart from the glitzy life Charles was accustomed to. As Charlie, Charles would shed his billionaire persona. He planned to meet Emily under the guise of a new volunteer eager to make a difference, not a tycoon with the world at his fingertips. He arranged for a modest apartment in Emily's neighborhood, dictating instructions to his assistant to furnish it in a manner that was comfortable yet far from luxurious. His wardrobe followed suit. Simple jeans and plain shirts replaced tailored suits and silk ties. In the following days, Charles immersed himself in Emily's world through online articles and videos of her advocacy. The more he learned, the more he admired her zeal, albeit begrudgingly. This wasn't just about winning a bet anymore. It was about stepping into an entirely different life, if only for a while. His first meeting with Emily was set at a community center where she often volunteered. As he prepared, Charles found himself unusually nervous. This wasn't a boardroom or a negotiation table, it was real life, and for once, his money offered no advantage here. Charles arrived early at the center, dressed unassumingly. He watched quietly as volunteers buzzed around, setting up for the day. He was about to step into a role that required more from him than any business deal ever had. As he adjusted his plain watch, substituted for the usual Rolex, he took a deep breath. Today, Charles Barton was Charlie, a man with nothing but a desire to help and perhaps to understand a part of the world he had long ignored. As he moved to greet Emily, his heart raced with a cocktail of anticipation and dread. This was his most challenging role yet, and the curtain was just rising. Charles, now Charlie, scanned the bustling community center with an anxious eagerness. He observed the volunteers, noting their casual interactions and genuine smiles. Among them, Emily stood out, not just for her commanding presence, but for the warmth she exuded while guiding her team. Today, he would have to engage her without the veil of wealth, relying solely on his intrinsic charm and empathy. As he approached, Emily was coordinating a food drive, her voice firm yet kind. She was shorter than he expected, her fiery spirit packed into a compact frame crowned with curly auburn hair. When their eyes met, Charles extended his hand, his voice slightly softer than usual. "Hi, I'm Charlie. I'm here to help out however I can," he introduced himself, trying to mirror the simplicity in his words with the sincerity in his eyes. Emily's handshake was firm, her gaze assessing him quickly. "Thanks for coming, Charlie. We can always use an extra pair of hands. Ever done anything like this before?" Her question, straightforward and mildly skeptical, hinted at her experience with fleeting volunteers. "Not exactly like this, but I'm a quick learner," Charles replied, a truthful edge to his answer. It was indeed his first time in such an environment, far removed from board meetings and corporate deals. "Great," Emily smiled, her initial reserve melting slightly. "Let's start you off with organizing the donations. We need to sort them before noon." She led him to a series of boxes filled with non-perishable foods, briefly explaining the process. As Charles sorted through cans and packages, he found the work grounding. The physicality of it was a stark contrast to his usual analytical tasks. Emily checked on him occasionally, offering tips and small talk that gradually peeled layers off their formal introductions. Through these snippets of conversation, Charles gleaned more about her passion for community work and her disdain for the city's economic divide, a point he carefully navigated around. The morning passed with surprising swiftness, and as they worked side by side, an unexpected ease settled between them. Charles was careful to maintain his role, focusing on the task and matching Emily's enthusiasm for the work. After the morning's successful initiation, Emily invited Charles to join her for more activities throughout the day. Each task offered him insights into her world and the community she served with such devotion. They moved from organizing food drives to assisting in a local literacy program in the afternoon. As they walked to the nearby library, Emily shared her vision for the program, her eyes alight with fervor. "Education is the cornerstone of empowerment. If we can get these kids excited about reading, it can change their trajectories," she explained, her hands gesturing animatedly. Charles listened intently, his usual reticence replaced by genuine interest. The library was a small, cozy space, filled with vibrant posters and shelves bursting with books. Here, Emily transformed from organizer to mentor, her interaction with the children both gentle and inspiring. Observing her, Charles found himself admiring not just her commitment, but the ease with which she connected with the children. He joined in, helping a small group with their reading assignments. The simplicity of the interaction, the laughter of the children, and the straightforward joy of the moment were elements his usual lifestyle lacked. Later, As they shared a modest lunch at a local diner, the conversation shifted from their work to more personal territories. Emily's guard was down, her curiosity about Charles's motivations for volunteering clear. "So, Charlie, what brings you to all this? It's not every day we get volunteers who dive in so deeply on their first day," she inquired, her tone light but probing. Charles crafted his backstory with care, weaving in truths about his desire for change and omitting the vast wealth that complicated his narrative. "I've reached a point where I want my actions to speak louder than words. I guess I'm searching for something more fulfilling," he shared, his gaze steady on hers. Emily nodded, her expression thoughtful. "That's refreshing to hear. We need more people looking to make a real difference." Their day concluded with Charles feeling an unfamiliar fulfillment. As he bid Emily goodbye, promising to return the next day, he realized he was no longer acting. He was genuinely looking forward to coming back, not just for the challenge, but for the enrichment it brought him, a sensation both novel and exhilarating. The subsequent week saw Charles, still as Charlie, weaving himself more seamlessly into the fabric of the community center's daily routine. His initial awkwardness faded, replaced by a growing confidence in his new role. He returned each day with a readiness that surprised even himself, drawn by a sense of purpose and the companionship he found among the volunteers, especially Emily. On a particularly brisk Thursday evening, Emily suggested a group outing after their shift at the center. "There's a trivia night at the local pub. It's a fun way to unwind. You should come, Charlie," she offered, her eyes sparkling with the unspoken challenge. Charles accepted, curious to experience another facet of this simpler life, and admittedly eager to spend more informal time with Emily. The pub was a cozy, dimly lit space that buzzed with the energy of regulars and newcomers alike. As the trivia began, Charles found himself grouped with Emily and two other volunteers. The questions spanned a range of topics, from history to pop culture, and surprisingly, Charles found himself engaged and contributing more than just correct answers. The light-hearted debates and laughter that flowed around the table sparked a camaraderie that Charles rarely felt in his high-stakes social circles. Emily's laughter, clear and genuine, was a sound Charles found himself increasingly drawn to. Between rounds, their conversation drifted to less casual topics, favorite books, personal aspirations, the intricacies of New York life. It was during a discussion on classic literature that Charles discovered Emily's love for Dickens, which mirrored his own. "His insight into human nature is timeless," Emily mused, sipping her drink. "Don't you think?" "Absolutely," Charles agreed, his response tinged with an enthusiasm he seldom allowed himself to show. "There's a raw truth to his characters, a reflection of society's own virtues and vices." The night unfolded with an ease that left Charles momentarily forgetting his real identity. He was just Charlie, enjoying an evening out with friends, relishing the genuine connections being forged. As they parted ways, Emily's casual "see you tomorrow, Charlie" carried a warmth that lingered with him on the quiet walk back to his apartment. The more time Charles spent with Emily, the more he found himself wrestling with the implications of his deception. Lying in bed that night, his mind replayed the evening's interactions, each moment tinged with the growing realization that his feelings for Emily were complicating what was meant to be a simple bet. The next morning, as Charles walked into the community center, the weight of his secret felt heavier than ever. Emily greeted him with her usual warm smile, and he found himself momentarily breathless, caught in the pull of her earnestness and the facade he maintained. Throughout the day, Charles found his thoughts drifting not to the tasks at hand, but to the moral entanglements of his situation. Each laugh they shared and each story exchanged added layers to his internal conflict. How much longer could he continue this charade? And at what cost to Emily's trust? Should the truth ever surface? In an unguarded moment, while organizing supplies in the back room, Charles confessed his growing doubts to another volunteer, Michael, who had become a confidant. "I didn't expect things to get this complicated," Charles admitted quietly, the boxes in his hands feeling suddenly cumbersome. Michael, leaning against the wall with a thoughtful frown, nodded slowly. "It sounds like you're caught between being Charlie and being yourself. It's a tough spot. Just remember, honesty tends to clear up more messes than it makes." The advice lingered with Charles as he finished his day's work. He noticed the small interactions between Emily and the people around her, each connection marked by transparency and trust. The contrast with his own duplicity struck a deep chord. As he left the center that day, the crisp air did little to clear his head. The decision he faced was monumental: continue the deception and risk everything he was beginning to cherish, or come clean and face the potential fallout. Each step towards his apartment felt heavier than the last, a symbol of the burden of his deceit and the impending choice that could unravel everything. The strain of maintaining his double life grew more taxing with each passing day. Charles, as Charlie, continued to immerse himself in the community's activities, but the shadow of his deceit loomed larger, coloring his interactions with a subtle tinge of guilt. This inner turmoil was compounded when Emily excitedly announced a new initiative to challenge economic inequality, a campaign targeting corporations that exploited lower-income workers. The irony wasn't lost on Charles. One of the companies on her list was a subsidiary of his own conglomerate. During a planning session for the campaign at the community center, Emily shared her research and strategies. "We need to bring these issues into the light. People deserve to know who's really behind their hardships," she declared passionately to the group, her eyes alight with a fiery determination. Charles nodded along, his expression carefully neutral while his mind raced. Supporting her was the right thing to do, but it put him in direct opposition to his own interests. As Charlie, he encouraged her, but as Charles Barton, he would have to navigate this new challenge without exposing his true identity. Later that day, as they sorted through materials for the campaign, Emily turned to him, her gaze inquisitive. "What do you think, Charlie? We could really use your thoughts on how to approach this." Charles hesitated, then offered strategic advice that would avoid direct confrontation with his companies, all while seeming to support her cause. "Maybe we should focus on raising awareness first, gathering more support before we name anyone directly," he suggested, hoping to buy time. Emily considered this, then nodded slowly. "That's a prudent approach." "Thanks, Charlie," she said, smiling at him, unaware of the conflict raging behind his calm facade. The duality of his life became even more pronounced when Hugo unexpectedly visited him at his corporate office. The sharp contrast between his luxurious, high-rise office and the modest community center was a stark reminder of the world he was straddling. Hugo, leaning against the expansive desk with a smirk, waved a financial magazine featuring Charles on the cover. "How's the bet going, Charlie? Or should I say, how's our philanthropic billionaire managing in the slums?" he teased, his tone light but edged with curiosity. Charles frowned, discomfort pinching his features. "It's going well. I'm learning a lot," he replied, keeping his voice even. The visit was a jarring intrusion of his real life into the facade he had crafted so carefully. Hugo's expression turned serious. "Just remember why you started this, Charles. It's a game. Don't let it get to your head. And certainly don't let it affect your judgment, especially with this new campaign Emily is planning." The mention of Emily's name tightened Charles's jaw. "It's under control, Hugo. I'm not losing sight of who I am," he said, though a part of him wasn't so sure anymore. Hugo studied him for a moment longer, then shrugged, dropping the magazine onto the desk. "Just be careful. It's not just your money on the line anymore, it's your reputation. Don't screw this up because you've gone soft, he warned, before leaving as abruptly as he had arrived. After Hugo left, Charles stood at his window overlooking the city, the weight of his friend's words settling over him. The view from here was vastly different from the one at the community center. It wasn't just a physical distance. It was a measure of the growing gap between the man he was and the man he was pretending to be. As he left work that day, Charles's thoughts were a maelstrom of doubt and determination. He had to handle this carefully. A wrong move could destroy everything he had built, both as Charles and as Charlie. As the campaign gained momentum, Charles found himself increasingly cornered by the dual aspects of his life. He watched as Emily passionately rallied the community, her words striking a chord with everyone who listened, everyone except him, trapped behind the facade of Charlie. Each meeting intensified his internal struggle, the facade beginning to crack under the weight of his genuine respect and affection for Emily. One afternoon, after a particularly stirring meeting at the community center, Emily pulled Charles aside. Her eyes were bright, with a mixture of excitement and determination. "Charlie, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support. It's like you truly understand what we're fighting for," she said, her hand briefly touching his arm in a gesture of camaraderie and trust. Charles felt a pang of guilt sharper than before. The touch, meant to be reassuring, only served to deepen the chasm within him. He managed to smile, though it felt hollow. "I do understand, Emily. More than you know," he replied, his voice tinged with an emotion he hadn't intended to reveal. Her gaze lingered on him, sensing something unspoken between them. "Is everything all right? You seem different," Emily inquired, her tone laced with concern. For a moment, Charles teetered on the edge of confession, but the fear of losing everything they were building together held him back. "Just tired, I guess." "It's been a long day," he deflected, hoping his smile would mask the turmoil inside. Emily nodded, though her eyes still held a flicker of doubt. "Well, if you ever need to talk, I'm here," she offered, giving his arm a reassuring squeeze before turning back to the group. As she walked away, Charles felt the divide between his two worlds grow even more profound. The realization that his actions could potentially destroy the trust and budding feelings developing between them weighed heavily on his heart. The campaign against economic inequality was set to culminate in a significant protest at the end of the week, directly targeting the very corporations Charles owned. The night before the event, Charles lay awake, the ceiling of his modest apartment a blank canvas for his racing thoughts. Tomorrow, everything could come crashing down, and with it, possibly, his relationship with Emily. Meanwhile, Emily was finalizing the details of the protest, her dedication unwavering. She sent Charles a late-night text. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. We're going to make a difference." Her message was a beacon of hope and a dagger of guilt, all at once. The morning of the protest, Charles arrived at the community center earlier than usual. The volunteers were buzzing with nervous energy, their spirits high with anticipation. Emily greeted him with a bright smile, her enthusiasm infectious. "Ready to change the world, Charlie?" she asked, her eyes shining with conviction. Charles mustered a smile, his heart heavy. "Ready as I'll ever be," he responded, his voice steady, despite the turmoil inside. As they headed out to the protest site, Charles's phone buzzed. A message from Hugo, crisp and ominous. "Remember who you are. Don't let emotions cloud your judgment." The warning was clear, but so was the choice Charles felt compelled to make. Standing at the crossroads of his dual identities, Charles watched as Emily rallied the crowd, her words echoing across the gathered masses. He knew then that his decision could not only define his future, but also redefine his very identity. With the protest set to start and Emily's trust in him complete, Charles faced a pivotal decision. Would he step forward as Charles Barton and reveal his truth, risking everything? Or would he continue to hide behind the mask of Charlie, supporting Emily from the shadows? The morning of the protest dawned crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil churning within Charles. As he joined the sea of determined faces gathering at the park, the weight of his decision pressed heavily on his shoulders. Around him, banners waved and chants filled the air, a united front against corporate greed, against him, though they did not know it. Emily was a force, weaving through the crowd, her energy magnetic. As she approached Charles, her smile was a mix of excitement and resolve. "This is it, Charlie. Today we make our voices heard," she declared, her hand gripping his arm in solidarity. Charles nodded, his response muted by the internal conflict. "Yes, today could change everything," he murmured, more to himself than to her. His gaze drifted over the crowd, each face a reminder of the stakes at play. Throughout the day, Charles found himself caught in a tug-of-war between his growing admiration for Emily's fervor and his anxiety about the impending revelation. As speeches rang out and the crowd's fervor grew, so did his sense of inevitability. He was part of this movement, yet apart from it, shielded by his deception. As the protest wound down, the intensity of the day gave way to a sense of accomplishment among the volunteers. Emily and Charles lingered in the dispersing crowd, their conversation turning reflective. "That was incredible, wasn't it?" Emily said, her eyes alight with passion and fatigue. "It feels like we really accomplished something today." Charles smiled, genuinely moved by her dedication. "It was, and you were amazing out there. You really believe in this, don't you?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "I do," she affirmed, her gaze meeting his. "And it seems like you do too, Charlie. I've never seen someone so new dive in with such sincerity. What drives you?" Caught off guard by the directness of her question, Charles hesitated. His fabricated persona, Charlie, was supposed to be a detached observer in his own narrative, yet here he was, deeply entangled. "And I guess I'm tired of sitting on the sidelines, seeing things go wrong and not doing anything about it," he confessed, the line between his truth and Charlie's blurring. Their conversation deepened as they walked away from the park, touching on hopes for the future and the changes they wished to see. With each word, Charles felt more connected to Emily and more alienated from his own reality. By the time they parted ways, a silent agreement had been forged. They were in this together, for better or worse. In the quiet of his apartment that evening, Charles reflected on the day's events. The images of the protest, Emily's fiery speech, the crowd's enthusiastic cheers, the sense of unity replayed in his mind, juxtaposed against the stark reality of his other life. The facade of Charlie was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain, not only externally, but internally. Charles found himself questioning not just his actions, but his fundamental beliefs about power and privilege. Lying in bed, he stared at the ceiling, the shadows there mimicking the dark thoughts swirling in his mind. He grappled with the realization that his involvement in the protest wasn't just about proving a point or winning a bet anymore. It was about the impact of his decisions on real lives, including Emily's. The deceit felt heavier than ever, a secret that held the power to destroy the trust and potential of something genuinely meaningful. Unable to sleep, Charles rose and paced the floor, the moonlight casting long shadows across the room. The battle between Charles and Charlie, between his identity as a billionaire and his guise as a volunteer, was reaching a crescendo. The urge to confess everything to Emily grew stronger with each passing moment, driven by both guilt and a desire for authenticity in his relationship with her. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Charles's office, his sister, Eleanor, who was not only a confidant but also one of the few people who knew about the bet. She entered his office with a concerned look, having heard about the protest and its targets through the media. "Charles, I saw the news." "How are you handling all of this?" Eleanor asked, her tone a mix of worry and curiosity. She perched on the edge of his desk, her keen eyes studying her brother. "It's complicated, Ellie," Charles admitted, running a hand through his hair. "The deeper I get, the more conflicted I feel. It's no longer just a game. There are real stakes, real emotions involved." Eleanor nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I've seen you change over these past weeks. This woman, Emily, she seems to have had a profound effect on you." Charles sighed, the weight of his sister's words sinking in. "She has. And the worst part is, she believes in Charlie, not in me, the real me. I'm caught in a lie that's getting harder to sustain every day." Eleanor reached out, placing a reassuring hand on his. "Maybe it's time to come clean, Charles. If she truly cares about you, she'll understand. And if not, it's better to know now rather than continue living a lie." Her words echoed his own thoughts, offering a sliver of resolve amidst the turmoil. Charles considered her advice seriously, the idea of transparency suddenly seeming not just daunting but necessary. "Thanks, Ellie. I think I know what I need to do," he said, a tentative plan forming in his mind. The path forward was fraught with risks, but Eleanor's visit had reinforced the idea that facing the truth, regardless of the consequences, was the only way he could ever hope to reconcile his two worlds. As the day of the gala approached, Charles found himself consumed with planning. The event, typically a highlight of the social season, was to fundraise for various charitable causes, but this year it carried a much heavier significance for him. He needed to orchestrate the evening flawlessly, balancing his public persona with his private turmoil. In his office, Charles reviewed the guest list and the evening's schedule. The gala would be swarming with influential figures, many of whom were indirectly connected to the issues Emily was campaigning against. As he finalized the arrangements, his assistant handed him a binder filled with details about the decorations, the menu, and the entertainment. Each choice seemed trivial compared to the decision looming over him. "Make sure everything is perfect, Thomas," Charles instructed, his tone more intense than usual. "Every detail matters tonight." "Yes, Mr. Barton," his assistant affirmed, sensing the urgency in Charles's voice. Meanwhile, Emily was also preparing for the gala, albeit with a different perspective. She viewed the event as a rare opportunity to bring her cause to a broader, more affluent audience. As she selected her dress, a simple yet elegant blue gown, she pondered the speech she would give, aiming to inspire generosity in a crowd that was often detached from the city's harsher realities. Charles and Emily spoke briefly over the phone during their preparations, their conversation a mix of anticipation and nerves. "I'm looking forward to tonight," Emily said, her voice betraying a hint of anxiety. Me too," Charles replied, the truth of his statement more complex than Emily could know. "It's going to be an important evening for many reasons." The night of the gala arrived, cloaking the city in a veneer of glamour and celebration. The venue, a grand ballroom, was adorned with luxurious drapes and glittering chandeliers, the atmosphere alive with anticipation and the murmur of well-dressed guests. Charles greeted attendees at the entrance, his demeanor the epitome of a gracious host, yet his eyes constantly searched for Emily. When she finally arrived, she took his breath away, her elegance a stark contrast to her usual activist attire. "You look incredible," Charles whispered as he offered her his arm, leading her into the throng of guests. "Thank you," Emily smiled, her nerves eased by his presence. "I'm a bit out of my element, but this is a good chance to spread our message." As the evening progressed, Charles was a model host, but his mind was elsewhere. He was planning the moment of his revelation, the point in the evening when he would step up to the microphone and disclose not only his financial contribution to Emily's cause, but also the truth about his identity. Finally, the moment came. The room hushed as Charles took the stage. His heart pounded as he looked out over the crowd, his gaze resting on Emily's expectant face. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight," Charles began, his voice steady. "Before I announce the total raised for our worthy causes, I have something personal to share." The guests leaned in, sensing the shift in his tone. Charles took a deep breath, his next words poised to alter everything. "Many of you know me as Charles Barton, but there is more to my story." Just as Charles was about to continue, a sudden commotion at the back of the room interrupted him. A group of protesters had somehow bypassed security, their chants about corporate greed slicing through the refined air of the gala. The interruption was perfectly timed with his confession, turning the evening into chaos. Emily turned to look at the protesters, then back at Charles, her expression a mix of confusion and surprise. The room buzzed with unsettled guests, and Charles knew he had to regain control, not just of the gala, but of the narrative now spiraling away from him. Amid the chaos, Charles quickly signaled the security to handle the protesters gently, his mind racing to salvage the situation. As the noise died down and order was restored, Charles returned to the podium, the room's attention snapping back to him with heightened anticipation. "Apologies for the interruption," Charles continued, his voice more determined. "As I was saying, there's more to my story. Many of you know me as a businessman, but for the past several months, I've been living a double life." A murmur rippled through the crowd as Charles paused, gathering his thoughts. "I joined a community initiative under an assumed name, Charlie, to understand the grassroots impact of economic disparities," he confessed, his gaze seeking out Emily. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of shock and curiosity etched across her face. "This experience has changed my perspective profoundly. I've seen firsthand the struggles and injustices faced by many in our city," Charles explained, his voice firm yet emotional. "Tonight, I not only pledge a significant donation to these causes, but also commit to changing how my businesses operate to support and uplift our community." The crowd responded with a mix of applause and whispers. Emily stood frozen, processing the revelation. As the applause died down, Charles stepped down from the stage and approached her. "Emily, I need to talk to you," he said quietly, his expression earnest. Emily nodded, still in shock, and followed him to a quieter part of the ballroom. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice a blend of hurt and confusion. "I was afraid," Charles admitted, "afraid of how you'd react knowing who I really am. But I couldn't keep lying to you, not when I care about you and your cause so deeply." Emily took a moment to respond, her mind racing through the implications of his confession. "It's a lot to process, Charles. I appreciate your honesty now, but I need some time to think about all of this." Charles nodded, understanding the gravity of his revelations and the space she needed. "Take all the time you need. I'm here when you're ready to talk," he offered, his tone sincere. In the days following the gala, Charles found himself in a state of limbo. The public response to his speech and donation was overwhelmingly positive, with media coverage praising his commitment to social change. However, the personal fallout was more challenging to navigate, especially regarding Emily. Emily had withdrawn, taking time to reflect on Charles's revelations and their implications for both her personal feelings and her professional endeavors. Charles respected her need for space, but the silence between them was painful, filled with uncertainty and regret. During this period, Charles spent long hours in his office reflecting on his journey from detached billionaire to engaged philanthropist. The solitude gave him time to think about what he truly valued and how he wanted to shape his future, regardless of the outcome with Emily. He also began implementing the changes he had pledged at the gala, meeting with his executives to discuss new policies and initiatives that would prioritize ethical business practices and community support. These actions provided him with a sense of purpose and partially filled the void left by Emily's absence. As he sat in his office one evening, looking over the city, Charles realized how much he had changed. The skyline that once represented conquest and power now reminded him of community and responsibility. He was ready to face whatever came next, hopeful but prepared for the possibility that his personal and professional transformations might lead to new beginnings, with or without Emily. As the days turned into weeks, Charles's commitment to change became more than just a series of public gestures. It was a deep, personal transformation. However, the distance between him and Emily remained a silent gap filled with unresolved emotions and unanswered questions. Despite this, Charles was determined to show Emily and the community that his intentions were genuine. He started by increasing his visits to the community center, not just as a donor, but as an active participant. He helped set up new programs, funded additional resources, and spent time with the people who benefited from the center's services. These actions were not grandiose or publicized. They were quiet, consistent efforts to make a difference. One afternoon, while Charles was helping organize a new educational workshop, Emily walked in. It was their first encounter since the gala, and the air between them was thick with hesitation. Charles paused, tools in hand, and offered her a tentative smile. "Hi, Emily," he said gently. "It's good to see you." Emily nodded, her expression cautious but not cold. "Hi, Charles. I see you've been busy here." "I'm trying to make things right," Charles replied, setting down his tools, "not just with donations, but with my own hands." Emily watched him for a moment, then slowly walked over. "I've been hearing about your efforts. People are saying good things." "That means a lot to me," Charles said, "especially coming from you." There was a pause, a breath of space filled with possibility. "I've had a lot to think about," Emily finally said, "and I see that you're sincere. I'm willing to talk, if you still want to." Charles felt a surge of relief mixed with hope. "I would like that very much." Their conversation began slowly, with tentative steps towards understanding each other's perspectives. They talked about their aspirations for the community, the impact of the gala, and the future. As the workshop continued around them, their dialogue deepened, touching on more personal themes of trust, betrayal, and forgiveness. As they spoke, Charles realized how much Emily had come to mean to him, not just as a partner in activism, but as someone he genuinely cared for. And for her part, Emily began to see the man behind the facade, the real Charles who was capable of change and deeply committed to making amends. However, just as they were reconnecting, a new challenge emerged. One of Charles's initiatives at his company, designed to increase corporate transparency and accountability, was met with significant resistance from his board. They threatened a major upheaval, potentially leading to his ousting as CEO. Charles received the news via a phone call, which he took in private, away from the workshop. When he returned, his face was drawn, the earlier optimism replaced by a new weight of concern. Emily noticed immediately. "What's wrong, Charles?" "It's the company," he explained. "The changes I'm trying to implement are being resisted. I might lose everything I've built." Emily's expression shifted from concern to determination. "Then we'll face that together," she said resolutely. "You're not alone in this anymore." The final moments of their conversation underscored the episode's theme of unity and support, setting the stage for the next episode where Charles would have to battle to retain his leadership and continue his reforms. The episode ended on a note of uncertainty, but also determination, as Charles and Emily prepared to confront the corporate challenge together. Their partnership strengthened, but their future uncertain. As the day of the crucial board meeting dawned, Charles felt the weight of the impending confrontation. This meeting was more than just a corporate battle. It was a testament to his commitment to change and the future of his relationship with Emily. In the stark, modern boardroom, Charles faced his fellow executives, each one a representation of the old guard, resistant to the changes he proposed. His plan to increase transparency and shift towards more ethical business practices had stirred up fears of reduced profits and increased scrutiny. "I understand your concerns," Charles began, his voice steady despite the tension. "But we have an opportunity here to lead, not just in our industries, but in corporate responsibility. We can be pioneers." The board members exchanged skeptical looks, their discomfort palpable. And to Charles, these changes could destabilize the company. One executive argued, his tone edged with frustration. "Perhaps in the short term," Charles conceded, "but think of the long-term gain, the trust of our consumers, the positive press, and most importantly, the integrity of knowing we're doing the right thing." As the debate intensified, Charles stood firm, his resolve strengthened by the knowledge that Emily was just outside the room, waiting. She had come to offer her moral support, a tangible reminder of why these changes were so crucial. The discussion reached a crescendo as Charles made a final plea, his words echoing around the room. "This isn't just about profits, it's about principles. If we lose sight of that, we lose everything that makes our work meaningful." The room fell silent, the board members pondering the gravity of his words. Outside, Emily listened intently, her heart racing with anticipation and pride in Charles's courage. After a long pause, a senior board member, who had been quiet throughout the meeting, spoke up. "Charles, your passion is clear and your points are compelling. Let's put it to a vote." As the board members cast their votes, Charles held his breath, the seconds stretching into what felt like hours. Finally, the chairman nodded solemnly. "And the motion to proceed with the changes passes. Charles, we'll follow your lead." A wave of relief washed over Charles as he stepped out of the boardroom to find Emily waiting. Her smile was radiant, her eyes reflecting a mix of pride and relief. "You did it," she whispered, reaching out to embrace him. "I did," Charles agreed, holding her close. "But I couldn't have done it without you." This victory belongs to us both. The success at the board meeting marked a pivotal moment for Charles and Emily. Buoyed by the board's endorsement, Charles felt a renewed sense of purpose. But he knew the road ahead would still be fraught with challenges. As they left the corporate building, Emily grasped his hand, her touch a grounding force amid the whirlwind of change. "Today was a big step, but there's still so much to do," Emily said thoughtfully as they walked through the bustling city streets, now bathed in the warm glow of the evening light. Charles nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "I know, and I'm ready for it, all of it, but only if you are with me. This doesn't work unless we're in this together." Emily stopped, turning to face him fully. "I am with you, Charles. After everything we've been through, I believe in us. I believe in what we're trying to do." Her affirmation filled Charles with warmth and determination. They spent the rest of the evening discussing plans for integrating their visions, combining her grassroots insight with his corporate power to create meaningful, sustainable change. Over the next few months, Charles and Emily worked tirelessly to implement the new corporate policies and expand their community initiatives. They launched a series of workshops designed to educate both corporate employees and community members about ethical business practices and social responsibility. One of their key initiatives was a partnership program between Charles's company and local businesses, aimed at fostering economic growth and sustainability within the community. Emily took the lead on this project, her expertise in community engagement proving invaluable. As these programs began to take effect, the public's perception of Charles's company gradually shifted. Media coverage praised the innovative approach, and other corporations started to take note, considering similar changes. One afternoon, as Charles and Emily reviewed the progress reports, they realized the extent of the impact they were creating. "Look at this." Emily pointed to a graph showing a significant rise in community satisfaction. We're actually making a difference." Charles looked over the data, a proud smile spreading across his face. "We are," he agreed, his eyes meeting hers, "and it's only the beginning." Their success not only strengthened their professional partnership, but deepened their personal relationship. The trust and respect between them had grown, rooted in shared goals and mutual support. As their initiatives began to bear fruit, Charles and Emily found themselves at a community gala celebrating the success of their collaboration. The event was held in the same ballroom where Charles had made his groundbreaking confession months earlier, but the atmosphere this time was markedly different, filled with hope and camaraderie rather than tension. Throughout the evening, community leaders and local business owners approached Charles and Emily, expressing gratitude and sharing stories of how the new programs had positively impacted their lives. Each testimony added another layer of validation to their efforts, reinforcing the trust and respect they had worked so hard to build. Seeing all of this, feeling the energy here tonight, it's more than I could have hoped for, Emily confessed to Charles as they stepped aside for a quiet moment on the balcony overlooking the city lights. Charles took her hand, his voice soft with sincerity. "We've come a long way, haven't we? Not just in what we've built here, but between us." Emily nodded, her eyes reflecting the city glow. "I was so unsure at the beginning about all of this. But now, I can't imagine doing it with anyone else." Their conversation deepened, turning to future plans and personal hopes. As they spoke, it became clear that their partnership had evolved into something much deeper, a mutual admiration and love that had grown quietly but steadily amidst their shared endeavors. In the following weeks, as they continued to push forward with their initiatives, a new challenge arose. A major investor expressed concerns about the profitability of Charles's company, given its shift towards ethical practices. The investor threatened to pull out, potentially unraveling much of the progress they had made. Faced with this threat, Charles had to make a difficult decision. He could revert to his company's old ways to appease the investor, or he could stand firm in his commitments, risking financial stability. After much deliberation, Charles chose the latter. "And I started this to make a difference, not to maintain the status quo," he told Emily, after informing her of his decision. "If that means taking a financial hit, so be it. We'll find other ways to sustain our work." Emily admired his resolve, realizing the magnitude of his sacrifice. "This won't be easy," she said, her hand squeezing his. "But you're not alone in this. We'll figure it out together." This decision only solidified their bond further, demonstrating Charles's unwavering commitment to their shared values. Together, they began seeking alternative funding, engaging with socially responsible investors who were aligned with their vision. Their unity and resilience in the face of financial challenges served as a powerful testament to their partnership, both professional and personal. They worked tirelessly, not only to sustain their initiatives, but also to prove that ethical business practices could indeed be sustainable. As Charles and Emily navigated the complexities of securing new funding, their efforts began to pay off. They attracted a group of investors who were particularly interested in sustainable and ethical business models. This new partnership brought not only financial relief, but also a fresh wave of enthusiasm and ideas, invigorating their projects with renewed vigor and potential. Amid this upswing, Charles and Emily took a moment to reflect on their journey during a quiet evening walk along the river. The city lights flickered like distant stars, mirroring the spark of their conversation. "We're really doing this, aren't we?" Emily mused, a note of awe in her voice as she looked out over the water. "After all the ups and downs, we're actually making a lasting impact." Charles nodded, feeling a profound sense of accomplishment and contentment. "We are. And to think how much we've grown through this process, not just the projects, but us, as a team." Their shared experiences had woven a strong fabric of respect and affection between them, which was now the foundation of their relationship. Deciding to capitalize on this moment of reflection, Charles turned to Emily, his expression serious but filled with warmth. "Emily, I've been thinking about the future a lot lately. Our future. There's nowhere I'd rather be than right here, doing this work with you, and I'd like to make that a permanent arrangement if you're willing." Emily's response was a radiant smile, her eyes welling up with emotion. "Yes, Charles, I'd like that very much." With their new investors on board and their personal commitment to each other solidified, Charles and Emily set about expanding their influence. They launched a series of public seminars and workshops aimed at educating other corporations on the benefits of ethical practices. Their work started to set a new standard in the industry, challenging other companies to reconsider their own policies. As they prepared for an upcoming conference where they were to speak about their journey and the lessons learned, Charles found himself reflecting on the profound personal changes he had undergone. From a skeptical businessman to a committed partner in both business and life, his transformation was a testament to the power of open-mindedness and genuine engagement with the world. At the conference, as they stood together on the stage, Emily spoke eloquently about the challenges they had faced and the victories they had won. "Change isn't easy," she said, her voice resonant with conviction. "It requires courage, commitment, and above all, partnership. What Charles and I have achieved together is a testament to that." Charles joined in, adding, "And it's a journey that continues. We learn every day about the work, about each other, and about how much more we can achieve together." Their message was met with enthusiastic applause, the audience inspired by their passion and integrity. As they stepped down from the stage, hand in hand, Charles felt a profound gratitude for the journey that had brought him to this point. The influence of Charles and Emily's initiatives continued to grow, reaching beyond their immediate community to touch businesses and lives nationwide. Stories of their impact were featured in major media outlets, and they were invited to speak at international forums on corporate responsibility and community engagement. Their success also sparked a movement, with more companies seeking to implement similar changes. Charles and Emily became leading figures in a global conversation about the power of ethical business to effect real, positive change. Back at home, they continued their local work with the same dedication and passion as they had from the start. They knew that the true measure of their impact was in the lives they touched directly, the communities they helped to build and strengthen. As Charles and Emily looked out over the city from the rooftop of their building one evening, they reflected on the incredible journey they had shared. The city lights below seemed to echo the bright future they had forged together, a future built on the principles of integrity, collaboration, and love. "I never imagined this when we started," Charles said, his arm around Emily, "but I can't imagine it any other way now." Emily leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "We took a chance on change, on each other, and it's made all the difference. I'm so grateful for this life we've built together." With their eyes set on the horizon, Charles and Emily were ready to face whatever challenges and opportunities the future might bring. Together, they had turned a personal challenge into a global impact, proving that with the right partner, anything is possible. If you enjoyed, consider subscribing to our channel and supporting us through the thanks button.